unmuted so that he can give that update. Go ahead, Elliot.
Thank you, Cam. So today's update reports on project status as the end of federal fiscal year 2021. All project phases still listed in 2021 have been federally authorized, and although working will continue on these phases until they're financially closed out, they will not be included in future reports. 3 project phases were carried forward from federal fiscal year 2021 and are now listed with their obligation deadlines under the federal fiscal year 2022 header. Including these project phases, there are a total of 8 project phases targeting obligation in 2022. Today's report also includes the addition of project phases approved at our last meeting that are programmed in federal fiscal years 2025 and 2026. Additional information about these project phases will be added after their first status update cycle in December. And finally, with the completion of the call for project cycle, our previous contingency program has expired. Staff is currently seeking confirmation from sponsors of all projects that are eligible to be included in the contingency program that those sponsors intend to keep projects actively moving towards implementation. The new contingency program and the status of those project phases will be reported following the December update cycle as well. With that, I'll field any questions you might have.
Any questions for Elliot this morning? All right, seeing none, moving on to our next item. The regional accounting update is also Elliot.
I'll keep talking then. So also included in the packet is an updated regional accounting summary through the end of federal fiscal year 2021. As shown between the shared fund and the local programs, over $148 million was obligated in federal fiscal year 2021. And this represents 67% of the funds available for the year. Now looking back, in the 5 years leading up to the STP agreement, which is 2013 to 2017, the region was averaging an obligation rate of 54% per year. So 67% now, we're headed in the right direction, but we do need to continue to be aggressively managing our projects. Looking at carryover, a little more than $72 million was carried forward into federal fiscal year 2022. That's $14.8 million in the shared fund and $57.4 million in the local programs. $6.7 million was not carried forward and is available for redistribution. Now, as a reminder, these redistribution funds are available to the entire region, including the shared fund, to be used on a first ready, first funded basis, and may be requested once a council, CDOT, or this body has obligated 100% of their funding for the year. Looking ahead to our current federal fiscal year, $252 million is available for obligation. And currently, more than 90% of that funding is already programmed for project phases. And finally, we do, of course, know that programs are being updated right now as councils and this body are identifying projects to utilize CRISA funds. So we expect to see quite a bit of active reprogramming in this accounting summary in the next few months. So by our next meeting, staff will also have an accounting summary for the CRISA fund. That is all for the regional accounting summary. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Any questions for Elliot or other staff on the accounting summary? Everybody's still awake? Yes, okay. All right, well, thank you, Elliot, very much for that report. We'll go ahead and move on to the meatier part of the agenda, which is our proposed CRISA funding allocations for the shared fund. As noted at our last meeting, about $5.3 million of the $42 million in coronavirus response and relief funds, which we'll be calling CRISA from here on out, were allocated to this committee for programming on existing shared fund active or contingency programs. As detailed in the memo in your packet, staff did identify 3 projects from the contingency program that best meet the goals for the use of CRISA funds to address safety, equity, and innovation, and that are also at a point in their implementation to be able to obligate funding by the FY22 deadline of September 30th. Those 3 projects and the proposed funding are a little more than $2.9 million for Indian Trail Road reconstruction in Aurora, which will improve safety on a segment of roadway with a critical safer road index or SRI rating. $853,000 for construction and construction engineering for the replacement of a four-way stop with a roundabout at Wolf's Crossing and Harvey Road in Oswego, which is both innovative and addresses another critical SRI location. And finally, $1.5 million for construction of the extension of Doberman Road in King County to bypass the village of Big Rock, which diverts traffic from facilities, again, with critical SRI ratings, and also provides a grade-separated crossing of the BNSF Railroad at one of the region's priority grade crossing locations. All three of these projects have secured a combination of other federal and local fund sources, as noted in the memo, and really were the top three projects in our contingency list that met those safety, innovation, and equity goals that we're targeting funding in FY22. So staff did look at the active projects in the out years first to see if we could move any of those forward based on meeting the goals and the available funding, and that just didn't seem like a reasonable approach. The math doesn't work. The projects aren't targeting the same goals as the CRISA funds, so we went ahead and moved to that contingency list. So at this time, staff is requesting committee approval to allocate the CRISA funding to these projects. Before I ask for a motion, are there any questions from the committee on the memo or the proposed approach? Kevin?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was noticing the screen said information, but it is approval, right?
It is. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm just curious. I was just sort of curious a little bit about because I know that the ranking, that was done. I noticed that there were some projects in 22 that I think there was a Kane Kendall project and maybe a CTA project that were sort of above the third project. I know that there's a logic there. I just sort of wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So with the CRISA funding, and this is what CMAP directed the councils and CDOT to do as well, was kind of our first priority for the CRISA funding, because these are pandemic relief funds, was to address the safety, innovation, and/or equity goals set forth. And so we looked at the contingency list with that lens first. So for example, the first project on our contingency list is a PACE project. It has a high inclusive growth score, but is targeting funding in 2024, and we need to spend the CRISA funding in 2022. So we kind of approached it that way, looking at, one, what's the highest ranked project, and then what's the highest ranked project that meets the safety, equity, and/or innovation goals. So, tagged those projects and then looked at matching the funding and timing, if that makes sense. You're muted, but I think you're nodding.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions about the funding allocation?
Chair, I just had a question. Do you look at regional application for these funds at all, or is it strictly what you identified as far as addressing safety, equity? Because all of these projects are far west. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I think
I'm not criticizing
out that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were trying to balance, I think, the next project in the contingency list that was targeting 2022, that was ready to go and met one of the goals, was in DuPage County, which is also to the west. So not a lot of folks ready to go in 2022 was part of the motivation. And we wanted to be true to both the safety, innovation, and equity, as well as trying to maintain kind of that rank order of this call for projects that we just went through. So
thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the staff recommended CRISA allocation?
So moved by Rockingham.
Gallagher, second.
Fantastic. Any further discussion? If not, I think Mary has joined us. Mary, do you want to call the roll?
Certainly. Okay, so Dan Burke.
Aye.
Kama Dobbs,
Aye.
President Gallagher,
Yes.
Kevin O'Malley,
Yes.
Mayor Rockingham,
Aye.
and Jeffrey Shriver.
All right, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. And as Elliot mentioned, we'll be tracking the CRRSA funds with quarterly status updates, the status reports, and the regional accounting summaries, just like we do the shared fund going forward. So next on our agenda is the shared fund methodology discussion outline. Now that we've completed our FY22 to 26 call for project cycle, we get to start all over and think about changes that this committee would like to consider making to the methodology for the next cycle. The memo in our packet identifies a few things to consider and lays out a tentative outline for discussions by topic. As noted, we should talk early in, I lost page 3 of my notes, there we go. We should talk early in the year about whether or not we want to make any changes to eligibility criteria, specifically continuing to tweak the phase 1 substantially complete definition, wanting to recognize that the use of the federal planning and environmental linkages, or PEL process, in this region, and also whether or not we want to make any changes to the eligible project types that we consider for funding. For example, based on comments that we've received during the comment period this summer, we should specifically discuss road expansions, which commenters were not in favor of. And then staff would also like to tighten up the descriptions of our transit station and bicycle and pedestrian barrier projects. So also, if members of the committee have other project types that we want to consider or tweaks that we want to make, we should discuss those at our first meeting of 2022. I think also at that first meeting, we can expect staff to suggest some of the scoring criteria that don't need further discussion, and also expect some brainstorming from the committee on any new criteria that staff should develop for discussion later in the spring or summer. 2 topics actually that have come up in recent months include ADA transition planning, as well as how to include consideration of climate mitigation and resilience in our programming throughout the region. So after our first meeting, the suggested schedule is meant to walk us through each of the major scoring elements, being readiness, transportation impact, planning factors, and sub-regional priority, probably over a series of 2, maybe bleeding into 3 meetings over the summer. And then we also need to discuss the Metropolitan Planning Council's suggestion for establishing some kind of minimum score threshold for funding consideration. Just to get us thinking a little, because our scoring method is set up to score projects relative to each other, rather than on an absolute point value, probably setting an overall minimum may be difficult, but staff thinks that there may be places, such as in the need scoring, where thresholds could be set. So for instance, should a safety project not be considered if it's at a location where there's a low or minimal SRI rating? So I think we can expect to have discussions like that this summer around the minimum threshold. Finally, toward this time next fall, we should be wrapping up our discussions and considering final language for the application booklet. And then staff also wants to clean up some of the active program management policies to address questions that have come up as we've gotten through one full shared fund cycle and then half of our local program cycle. There have been questions along the way, interpretations, and while we've issued supplemental guidance, we'd like to just get the policies cleaned up before that next call for projects. So lastly, we're not bound to the schedule that's outlined in the memo, so we don't need to approve that memo today. But staff is curious if there are any thoughts from the committee on whether this outline makes sense for us going forward over the next year, as well as any thoughts or discussion now that we want to have on project types or additional criteria to consider, or anything else that you want staff to prepare headed into our discussions in the next calendar year. Nothing.
To me, it should allow. You have enough flexibility. If we think of stuff along the way, we can always insert it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we did that in the last cycle too. We had an outline and things came up. and we inserted them. I think we've got plenty of time in the schedule to have some good, thoughtful discussions. We'll be going into our third cycle, so hopefully everybody's feeling relatively comfortable with the core of the methodology, and we're just looking for places to tweak a little.
Hey, Tama,
Yes, go ahead, Tara.
you mentioned in the redefining the substantially complete for the phase one. I'm sorry if I missed it. When would that happen? When would that be clarified?
So because having your phase one completed ahead of applying needs to happen,
Sure.
we would want to have that discussion right at the beginning of the year, right at probably our first meeting of 2022.
Very good.
Again, I think it's minor tweaks, just again continuing to fine tune the language to help folks be clear on what's required.
Yeah, and usually those ones that are on the bubble of being almost there are the ones you want the funding for, right? Because you're poised to get it. So happy to see that we're getting that clarification, because it continues to evolve, the whole process.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a number of the Pell studies going on in the region now, and there's definitely good argument for saying if you've completed Pell, it's almost the same as substantially completing phase one engineering, because you've gotten through kind of the major environmental hurdles. And I think that now that we're into our third call cycle, it's clear we're going to be filling out years of our program. And so, we may want to consider relaxing just a little bit that bubble that you're talking about, right, Tara? As you're almost to the end, making sure that we're not holding somebody back another 5 years just because they're almost to the end versus at the end. So I think that's the discussion we expect to have in February.
Very good. Thank you.
Of course. Other thoughts or ideas? Any new and exciting project types anybody wants staff to research? Innovative scoring techniques. I know we definitely as a region want to talk about climate and resilience. So we'll be bringing that forward. All right. Well, of course, if you have an idea in the middle of December when we're not meeting, just feel free to ring up staff. We'll be happy to chat about it and prepare something for the whole committee to discuss. So thank you. All right. So next on our agenda are our proposed 2022 meetings. As we've done in the last few years, these dates are coinciding with our CMAQ project selection committee dates. And all of those dates are set kind of by working backwards from CMAP's transportation committee so that we can facilitate timely tip changes based on committee actions. While the TCE dates aren't final yet, they will be final in early November. So these dates on the screen right now are technically tentative, but we're not expecting any changes to the transportation committee dates. If there are changes, staff would go ahead and propose changing this committee's dates to correspond with those. So for now, staff is just asking that we hold these dates pending that final transportation committee schedule. And once that's finalized, we'll go ahead and send out Outlook calendar invites to get these meetings onto everybody's calendar for the next year. So I guess in the next few days, if you could let staff know if you see any major conflicts with any of these proposed dates, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, we will send those calendar invites out after we have a final master schedule for all of our transportation work. Any questions or comments on the calendar? All right, we're going for record meetings again. Moving on to our other business item, staff has nothing additional. Do any members of the committee have any other business they'd like to discuss? Nothing? See shaking heads. All right. Hearing none, then let's move on to public comment. Staff did not receive any public comment prior to the meeting, and I don't see any comments. I'm going to double check though. Don't see any comments in the chat box. So if anyone else in attendance today would like to speak, go ahead and please unmute yourself, and we will recognize your comments. And I don't see anybody. Going once, going twice. All right. Seeing no public comment, our next meeting, based on the tentative schedule, is Thursday, February 10th at 9:30 a.m. And although it seems kind of early to say this, I want to say everybody have a safe, healthy, happy holiday season, starting with Halloween all the way through the new year, since we won't see each other again as this committee until February. And hopefully by then we'll actually be able to get back together in person.
Thank you.
Bah humbug.
Thank you.
Bah humbug. All right,
Happy holidays.
great. All right, seeing no other business done, I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned at 9:56 a.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye.